The hardest chains to break are the ones everyone else calls destiny. I never imagined my wedding day would begin with rain tapping softly against stained glass instead of laughter filling the air. Every slow heartbeat echoed through the small chapel while strangers dressed in expensive suits quietly took their seats as though they had rehearsed this moment for years. I stood alone at the entrance wearing a white dress I had never chosen, gripping a bouquet that felt heavier than anything flowers should ever weigh. My father could not meet my eyes. My mother kept twisting a handkerchief between trembling fingers. Neither of them looked happy. They looked relieved, and somehow that hurt even more. 1 week earlier, my biggest concern had been finding enough overtime hours at the rehabilitation clinic to pay next month's rent. I believed my future would be measured by small victories, helping patients walk again, drinking bad coffee between appointments, and laughing with coworkers after exhausting shifts. Then Nathan Hayes walked into our apartment carrying nothing more than a leather folder and the kind of quiet confidence that made every conversation feel like it had already ended before anyone else spoke. I hated him before he even introduced himself. Not because he raised his voice. He never did. Not because he threatened my family. He never had to. He simply placed several papers on our old kitchen table and calmly explained that a promise made many years ago had finally come due. By the end of the week, I would become his wife. I laughed at first because the idea sounded impossible. Men with private security, tailored black suits, and headlines built on whispered rumors did not marry women who spent every paycheck helping strangers recover from injuries. When I refused, Nathan did not argue. He only looked toward my father with quiet sadness before saying, "There is no other way to keep her safe." I demanded an explanation. None came. Every question I asked met the same answer. "I cannot tell you yet." Every hour after that felt stolen from someone else's life. Friends stopped calling. Neighbors suddenly avoided eye contact. Even the familiar streets. Outside my apartment seemed different, as though the city itself already knew something I did not. Now I stood inside the chapel listening to the organ play softly while Nathan waited beside the altar. He looked exactly as he had the first day we met, perfectly composed, wearing a tailored black suit with not a single wrinkle, his dark hair neatly styled, his blue eyes impossible to read. He did not smile when I began walking toward him. He did not look victorious. If anything, he looked tired. That confused me more than anything else. A man forcing someone into marriage should have looked satisfied. Nathan looked as though every step I took cost him something he could never replace. The minister welcomed everyone before asking us to face one another. My hands trembled despite every attempt to hide it. I wanted to turn around, push open the chapel doors, and disappear into the rain before anyone could stop me. Nathan noticed the movement instantly. Without touching me, he leaned forward just enough for only me to hear his voice. "If there had been another choice, you would never be standing here." I stared at him with every ounce of anger I still possessed. "I will never forgive you for this." His expression never changed. "I know." The ceremony continued around us, every word sounding distant beneath the pounding of my own heartbeat. Then the minister asked the question that mattered most. Before I could answer, I searched Nathan's face one final time, expecting arrogance, pride, or triumph. Instead, I saw quiet regret, and for one impossible second, I wondered whether the man I believed had stolen my future was secretly sacrificing his own. The drive away from the chapel felt quieter than any silence I had ever known. Rain slipped across the tinted windows in slow silver lines while the city drifted past without noticing that my entire future had changed in less than 30 minutes. Nathan Hayes sat across from me inside the spacious sport utility vehicle, reading several documents that one of his advisors had quietly handed him before we left the church. He did not look at me. He did not try to start a conversation. That almost made me angrier. If he truly believed he had the right to decide my life, the least he could do was admit it out loud. 45 minutes later, the vehicle passed through enormous wrought iron gates that opened without a sound. Beyond them stood an estate so large it looked more like a private resort than a home. Carefully trimmed gardens surrounded a stone mansion overlooking a peaceful lake. Everything appeared beautiful. Nothing felt welcoming. A woman with silver hair and kind eyes greeted us at the front entrance before offering me a gentle smile. "Welcome, Mrs. Hayes." The title settled heavily across my shoulders. I had never wanted it. Nathan removed his coat before speaking quietly. "Margaret has managed this house for many years. If you need anything, ask her." I folded my arms. What if I need my old life back? He held my gaze without hesitation. "I know." That was all he said before walking toward a nearby office where several advisors already waited. No orders. No demands. No reminders that I belonged there. Margaret led me upstairs, showing me a bedroom overlooking the lake. Fresh flowers rested beside the window. Books filled one wall. A comfortable reading chair faced the water. Nothing about the room looked like a prison, yet every beautiful detail reminded me that someone else had chosen it for me. I opened the closet expecting expensive designer clothing selected to fit the image of a mafia boss's wife. Instead, I found several empty shelves beside only a few simple outfits in my size. Margaret noticed my surprise. "Mr. Hayes asked us not to replace your personal style. He said your room should feel like yours, not his." I looked away before she could see the confusion on my face. That evening I wandered through the quiet hallways while rain continued tapping softly against the windows. The estate felt strangely peaceful. Staff members greeted one another by name. Laughter drifted from the kitchen. No one lowered their voice because I entered the room. They treated me like an unexpected guest instead of someone trapped by circumstances. Curiosity eventually carried me toward the library. Floor-to-ceiling shelves surrounded a stone fireplace where warm light flickered. Across polished wood, medical journals rested beside history books and biographies. I pulled one volume from the shelf, only to discover handwritten notes carefully tucked between several pages. Someone had spent years studying rehabilitation medicine. I frowned. Nathan had no reason to read books about physical therapy. Soft footsteps interrupted my thoughts. Nathan entered carrying a cup of black coffee. He noticed the book in my hands and paused. "You may borrow anything you like." "Why do you own medical journals?" I asked. His expression softened for the briefest moment. "Because understanding how people heal has always mattered to me." Before I could ask another question, his phone vibrated quietly. He glanced at the screen, slipped the device back into his pocket, and looked toward the rain beyond the tall windows. "You are free to leave the estate whenever you wish," he said. "No one will stop you." I stared at him in disbelief. "Then why marry me at all?" He closed his eyes for a single heartbeat before answering. "Because some doors only stay open long enough to save a life." Then he walked away, leaving me alone with a question that suddenly felt far more frightening than the marriage itself. The question Nathan left behind refused to leave my mind. Some doors only stay open long enough to save a life. I repeated those words throughout the night while rain whispered against the windows overlooking the lake. They sounded less like an excuse and more like a warning. By morning, the storm had disappeared, leaving the estate wrapped in quiet sunlight that made everything look ordinary again. I almost convinced myself I had imagined the sadness in his voice. Almost. After breakfast, Margaret handed me the keys to a silver sedan. "You are welcome to visit town whenever you wish," she said with the same gentle smile she always wore. "No escort?" I asked. She shook her head. "Mr. Hayes believes trust has to begin somewhere." That answer surprised me more than I wanted to admit. I drove into the nearby town expecting suspicious glances once people recognized the last name I had unwillingly accepted. Instead, the bookstore owner greeted me warmly. A young mother thanked me for helping her son at the rehabilitation clinic months earlier. An elderly couple smiled politely as they walked past. Everything felt painfully normal. On my way back, I stopped outside a neighborhood community center where volunteers unloaded food, school supplies, and medical equipment. Curious, I stepped inside. Children's laughter echoed through bright hallways decorated with colorful artwork. A volunteer carrying several boxes nearly dropped them before noticing me. "You are here to see Mr. Hayes?" she asked. I frowned. "He comes here often?" She laughed softly. "Every week if he can. Usually before anyone else arrives." Another volunteer pointed toward a classroom where several children proudly displayed paintings across the walls. One drawing immediately caught my attention. It showed a large tree beside a quiet lake with a handwritten note beneath it. "Thank you for helping my family stay together." There was no mention of donations, no photographs of ceremonies, no plaque honoring Nathan. Everything he had done seemed intentionally invisible. As I wandered farther inside, I found a bulletin board filled with letters from families who had received scholarships, housing assistance, therapy programs, and emergency support. His name appeared nowhere, yet several volunteers quietly told me the same story. Whenever help arrived, it arrived without conditions. That did not fit the image I had built of him. Late that afternoon, I returned to the estate carrying more questions than answers. I found Nathan in the library reviewing documents beneath the warm glow of a reading lamp. He looked up as I entered, but returned his attention to the papers without asking where I had been. "I visited the community center," I said. He nodded once. "Did you find what you were looking for?" "I am not sure anymore." I stepped closer, placing one of the children's drawings on the table between us. "Why hide everything you do?" Nathan studied the drawing for several seconds before answering. "Because gratitude should belong to the people who feel it, not the person who receives it." His quiet reply settled over the room. I wanted to argue. Instead, I remembered every grateful face I had seen that afternoon. Before either of us spoke again, a phone resting on the desk vibrated. Nathan glanced at the screen. The calm in his expression disappeared for the first time since I had met him. He stood immediately, folded the drawing with unexpected care, and slipped it safely inside a folder. "Emily," he said softly, "until I return, please stay inside the estate." "What happened?" I asked. He held my gaze for one long heartbeat before answering. "Someone has started asking questions about you that they should never have known to ask." The silence Nathan left behind settled over the estate like morning fog across the lake. I stood in the library long after the front door closed, staring at the place where he had been only moments earlier. Someone had started asking questions about me. Until then, I had believed I was only a reluctant wife caught inside another person's complicated world. Now I realized that somehow I had become part of it. The thought followed me through the rest of the afternoon. Margaret noticed I barely touched my lunch, but she never pressed for answers. Instead, she quietly placed a fresh pot of tea beside me on the terrace overlooking the gardens. "He worries more than he lets anyone see," she said softly. "Nathan?" I asked. She nodded. "He believes carrying every burden alone protects everyone else." I looked toward the long driveway disappearing behind rows of maple trees. "Does it?" Margaret smiled with gentle sadness. "Not always." Her words lingered long after she returned inside. As the afternoon faded into evening, I wandered through the estate searching for anything that might explain the growing uneasiness I could not shake. The house remained peaceful, yet small changes caught my attention. Staff members quietly spoke into earpieces before returning to their work. Several unfamiliar vehicles appeared near the front entrance. Claire arrived carrying folders filled with schedules and community reports, her calm expression carefully hiding concern. No one panicked. They simply prepared. That frightened me more than panic would have. Shortly before sunset, I stepped into the library again hoping to distract myself with one of the rehabilitation journals Nathan had collected. Instead, I noticed a leather portfolio resting beside the fireplace, slightly open as though someone had left in a hurry. I hesitated before lifting the cover. Inside were photographs of community centers, handwritten notes about scholarship programs, and lists of families receiving assistance. Every page focused on helping someone rebuild a life. Then I found a folded map marked with small blue circles connected by careful lines. One circle surrounded the rehabilitation clinic where I had worked. Another marked my parents' neighborhood. Several more surrounded schools, shelters, and community centers. None of them pointed toward businesses or private properties. They pointed toward people. I quickly closed the portfolio when footsteps echoed in the hallway. Nathan entered looking more tired than I had ever seen him. His tie had been loosened, and faint shadows rested beneath his eyes, but the first thing he did was ask, "Have you eaten?" I blinked in surprise. That is your first question? He offered the faintest smile. It is the one that matters most right now. I studied him carefully. You look exhausted. It has been a long day. He noticed the portfolio beside me but showed no concern that I had seen it. Instead, he sat across from me and quietly poured himself a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. Those locations, I said gently. You have been protecting them. He looked down at the map before answering. I have been trying to. Including my clinic? His eyes met mine with complete honesty. Long before we met. Every answer he gave only created another question. Before I could ask it, Claire appeared in the doorway carrying a single sealed envelope. She handed it to Nathan without speaking. He opened it slowly, read one short page, and closed his eyes for a brief moment. When he looked back at me, the calm remained in his voice, but something had changed deep within it. Emily, he said quietly, it is time for me to tell you why your father trusted me with a promise that neither of us ever wanted you to inherit. The sealed envelope rested between us like a question neither of us wanted to answer. Nathan did not open it again. Instead, he carried it to the terrace overlooking the lake where the last light of evening shimmered across the water. I followed without saying a word. The cool air smelled of pine and rain, and somewhere beyond the trees a pair of birds settled quietly into the branches. Nathan rested both hands on the wooden railing before speaking. Your father and I met 15 years ago, he said. At a time when neither of us expected to survive the choices we had already made. I looked at him carefully. His voice carried no pride, only memory. He was the first person who treated me like a human being instead of a reputation. When everyone else saw influence, he saw responsibility. He reached into the envelope and removed an old photograph. It showed my father standing beside a younger Nathan outside an unfinished community center. Both of them were smiling beneath construction helmets covered in dust. I had never seen that picture before. This building was almost abandoned, Nathan continued. Your father convinced me that investing in people would always matter more than protecting my image. My throat tightened. Why did he never tell me? Nathan smiled faintly. Because he hoped you would never need to carry the weight of that promise. He unfolded a faded document, careful not to damage the fragile paper. 2 signatures rested at the bottom. One belonged to my father. The other belonged to Nathan. Above them, a single sentence had been written in careful handwriting. If one family ever stands in danger beyond its own strength, the other will stand beside them without hesitation. I read the words twice before looking back at Nathan. This is why you married me. He nodded slowly. Several people discovered this agreement years after it was signed. They believed reaching you would force me to surrender everything I had built. Then why not simply tell me from the beginning? His eyes remained fixed on the lake. Because every person who knew the full truth increased the chance that someone else would learn it as well. I chose your anger over your risk. Those words settled deep inside me. For weeks I had believed he valued control more than honesty. Now I realized he had accepted being misunderstood if it meant I stayed alive. Before I could answer, Claire stepped quietly onto the terrace carrying a folder of updated reports. The community centers remain open, she said. The volunteers have confirmed tomorrow's schedule. Nathan thanked her before reading a short summary. He closed the folder almost immediately. Nothing changes, he said. Families should never lose their sense of normal because someone wants attention. Claire nodded and disappeared back inside. I looked at Nathan in disbelief. Even now you are thinking about everyone else. He gave a tired smile. Your father once told me that fear spreads faster than kindness unless someone decides otherwise. We stood together in silence as the first stars appeared above the lake. For the first time since our wedding, I no longer saw a man hiding behind power. I saw someone carrying promises that had quietly shaped both of our lives long before we ever met. Then my phone vibrated. It was a message from an unknown number containing only one sentence. The promise ends when he stops protecting you. I looked up immediately. Nathan had not seen the screen, yet somehow he already knew something had changed. His expression grew quietly alert as he asked, Emily, what did they send you this time? The message remained glowing on my phone long after the screen should have gone dark. The promise ends when he stops protecting you. I slowly handed the device to Nathan without saying a word. He read the sentence once, locked the screen, and returned the phone to me with remarkable calm. "Delete it," he said quietly. "That is all?" I asked. Someone is trying to make fear speak louder than trust. His answer should have frustrated me. Instead, it revealed something I had only recently begun to understand. Nathan refused to let strangers decide how either of us would think. The following morning, the estate awakened before sunrise. Volunteers arrived carrying supplies for community programs while advisors quietly reviewed schedules in the conference room. I expected Nathan to cancel every public event. After the anonymous message, he did the opposite. Standing beside a large map covered with handwritten notes, he calmly thanked everyone for coming before speaking in the same measured voice I had heard since the day we met. "Every family expecting help today will receive it exactly as promised. We will not replace hope with uncertainty." One advisor hesitated before asking, would postponing the events not be safer? Nathan folded his hands. Children should never pay the price for problems they did not create. No one argued after that. I listened from the doorway, realizing that his decisions were guided less by power than by responsibility. When the meeting ended, Claire approached me carrying a folder filled with volunteer schedules. "We could use another pair of hands at the rehabilitation workshop," she said. Before I could answer, Nathan gently interrupted. "Only if Emily wants to be there." He looked directly at me. There was no expectation in his expression, only respect for whatever choice I made. Weeks earlier, I would have walked away simply to prove I still could. Instead, I surprised both of us. "I want to help." Nathan smiled almost imperceptibly before nodding once. "Then let us go." The community center buzzed with ordinary life when we arrived. Children laughed while painting colorful murals. Elderly neighbors shared coffee near the entrance. Therapists guided patients through gentle exercises. For the first time since my wedding, I was not standing beside Nathan because circumstances demanded it. I was there because people genuinely needed help, and I understood that world better than anyone else in the room. I spent the morning organizing rehabilitation activities, answering parents' questions, and encouraging patients who reminded me why I had chosen this profession years earlier. Every time I glanced across the building, I noticed Nathan quietly moving from room to room, greeting volunteers by name, listening more than speaking, and making certain every person felt seen. Nobody treated him like a feared public figure. They greeted him like someone who always arrived when promises needed to be kept. Late that afternoon, an elderly man approached our table carrying a worn baseball cap in his hands. "Mr. Hayes," he said warmly, "my granddaughter started college this week because of the scholarship your foundation gave her." Nathan smiled gently. "She earned that opportunity herself." The man shook his head. "You made sure she could reach it." I watched the exchange in silence. Nathan never accepted the praise. He simply asked about the young woman's classes before wishing her success. That simple conversation changed something inside me. Real strength was not measured by how many people feared a person. It was measured by how many people quietly stood taller because someone believed in them. As the last families prepared to leave, a volunteer handed me a sealed envelope that had been left without a name near the reception desk. My heartbeat slowed as I opened it. Inside rested a single photograph taken earlier that day. It showed Nathan and me speaking with smiling children only minutes before. Across the bottom, one sentence had been typed in plain black letters. "Tomorrow he will have to choose between protecting you and protecting everything else he has built." The photograph rested on the table between Nathan and me long after everyone else had gone home. "Tomorrow he will have to choose between protecting you and protecting everything else he has built." I read the sentence again, hoping it would lose its power the second time. It did not. Nathan quietly folded the paper and slipped it into the same leather folder that now held every anonymous message we had received. "They want us to believe every promise has a price," he said softly. "Does it?" I asked. He looked out the window where evening settled over the lake in shades of blue and gold. "Only if we agree to pay it." The following morning, the estate awakened earlier than usual. Claire arrived before sunrise carrying updated reports, while several advisors gathered around the conference table. Their conversations remained calm, but I could feel the weight inside every quiet sentence. Nathan listened carefully before standing beside the large map that had become familiar over the past few weeks. Community centers, rehabilitation programs, scholarships, and family services covered nearly every page. He rested one hand lightly against the table before speaking. I have made my decision. Every voice disappeared. Effective immediately, we will transfer leadership of several business operations to independent trustees. Every resource that supports our community programs will remain protected. One advisor frowned. That will reduce your influence. Nathan nodded. Influence was never the mission. Another advisor looked down at the financial reports. Several partners may leave. Nathan answered without hesitation. Then they leave. The room remained silent. No one questioned him again. I watched from the doorway, realizing the anonymous warning had already become reality. He was choosing people over power without asking anyone to notice the sacrifice. After the meeting ended, I found him alone on the terrace overlooking the lake. Morning sunlight shimmered across the calm water, while cool autumn air carried the scent of pine through the gardens. You knew this would happen, I said. I hoped it would not, he replied. There is a difference. I stepped beside him. You are giving up everything you built. He smiled gently. Not everything. I looked at him with quiet confusion. The only things worth building are the ones that still matter after the titles disappear. His words settled deep inside me. Weeks earlier, I would have dismissed them as another carefully chosen answer. Now I believed every one of them. Later that afternoon, news quietly spread through the foundation. Several longtime partners announced they would end their relationships with Nathan's organization. A few large projects would have to wait. Others would continue through volunteers and smaller donations. No one celebrated the losses, but no one abandoned the mission either. Families still arrived for therapy appointments. Children still filled classrooms with laughter. Volunteers still unpacked supplies as though kindness had simply found another path forward. As I helped organize rehabilitation activities, an elderly woman gently squeezed my hand. He never lets difficult days become our burden, she whispered. I looked. Across the room where Nathan was helping move folding tables with several volunteers. There were no cameras. No speeches. No applause. Only quiet work. For the first time since our wedding, I understood what strength actually looked like. It was not the ability to control a room. It was the willingness to lose everything except your principles. That evening, as the last rays of sunlight disappeared beyond the lake, I found Nathan placing another stack of handwritten scholarship letters into neatly labeled folders. You once told me I was free to leave whenever I wanted, I said. He nodded without looking up. That has never changed. I stepped closer until only a few inches separated us. Then hear my decision. He slowly raised his eyes to meet mine. I am still here, I whispered. Not because of a promise my father made. Because I finally understand the promise you made for him. Before Nathan could answer, Claire entered quietly carrying a tablet displaying a breaking financial report. Several remaining investors had officially withdrawn their support. Nathan read the headline, closed the screen with complete calm, and smiled with quiet relief. Good, he said. Now we will finally learn who stayed because they believed in the mission instead of believing in me. The morning after the financial report felt strangely peaceful, as though the world had decided to pause before taking its next breath. Sunlight spilled across the lake outside the estate, painting long ribbons of gold over the calm water while birds circled above the maple trees. For the first time since our wedding, I woke without wondering how I could escape. Instead, I found myself wondering how I could help. Downstairs, the dining room remained almost empty except for Margaret arranging fresh flowers near the window. She smiled the moment she saw me. He has already gone to the community center, she said. He wanted everyone to see that nothing important has changed. I drove there alone, no longer surprised that no one tried to stop me. Trust had quietly replaced the invisible walls I once imagined surrounded my life. The community center looked exactly as it always had. Children hurried through the entrance carrying backpacks almost larger than themselves. Volunteers unloaded food donations while therapists prepared activity rooms for the day's rehabilitation sessions. Nothing about the building suggested that its largest supporters had walked away only yesterday. Nathan stood near the reception desk speaking with an elderly volunteer whose hands shook slightly while organizing paperwork. Instead of taking over, he patiently listened until she finished every sentence. When she thanked him for staying despite everything that had happened, he smiled gently. "People need consistency more than perfection," he replied. Those words lingered with me throughout the day. I spent the morning helping patients regain strength after surgery, encouraging frightened children through simple therapy exercises, and organizing supplies beside volunteers who welcomed me without hesitation. No one treated me like the wife of an influential man. They simply treated me like another person willing to help. It felt more meaningful than I could explain. Shortly after lunch, Claire quietly entered the rehabilitation room carrying a folder. She caught Nathan's attention with nothing more than a brief glance. He stepped into the hallway while I continued working with a young boy learning to balance confidently after months of recovery. A few minutes later, Nathan returned. His expression remained calm, yet I recognized the quiet determination that always appeared whenever difficult choices arrived. "Everything all right?" I asked as we stacked therapy equipment together. He nodded slowly. "The last major partnership officially ended this morning." I waited for disappointment to appear across his face. It never did. Instead, he looked around the bright room filled with families laughing together. "Nothing we truly built disappeared today," he said. "Buildings matter less than the people inside them." Before I realized what I was doing, I reached for his hand. This time there was no hesitation, no confusion, and no sense of obligation. It was simply the most natural decision I had made since the day we met. Nathan looked down at our hands with genuine surprise before meeting. My eyes. "Emily," he said quietly, "you do not owe me anything." I smiled through tears I no longer tried to hide. "I know." The answer came easily. "That is why I am still here." He closed his fingers around mine with the same quiet respect that had defined every step of our journey, never tightening his grip, never asking for more than I freely chose to give. Outside the large windows, afternoon sunlight filled the courtyard where children chased one another beneath colorful banners, while parents gathered around picnic tables sharing coffee and conversation. Watching them, I finally understood something my father had known long before I ever met Nathan. A life built on fear can survive for a while, but a life built on trust keeps growing long after fear has disappeared. At that moment, I realized our marriage had not been saved by power, promises, or sacrifice alone. It had been transformed by choice, and for the very first time, that choice belonged equally to both of us. Some endings do not arrive with applause. They arrive quietly, like sunlight returning after a long season of rain. 6 months passed before I realized I had stopped counting the days since our wedding. The calendar no longer measured my life by fear or uncertainty. Instead, it measured therapy appointments completed, scholarships awarded, families reunited, and children whose laughter once again filled the halls of the community center every Saturday morning. The estate overlooking the lake no longer felt like a place someone had chosen for me. It had become the place where I finally learned that peace is not something another person gives you. It is something two people protect together. Nathan never tried to rebuild the influence he had willingly left behind. Several opportunities returned over time, but he accepted only those that aligned with the purpose he had always placed above reputation. Every decision began with the same question. Would this help people rebuild their lives? If the answer was no, the conversation ended there. Watching him live by that principle every single day changed me more than any promise ever could. I returned to my work as a rehabilitation therapist while helping coordinate the Foundation's outreach programs. We expanded therapy services into neighborhoods that had never been able to afford them before. Volunteers arrived from every corner of the city. Retired teachers tutored children after school. Local businesses quietly donated equipment. Families who had once received help came back months later to become volunteers themselves. Hope spread the way fear never could, one ordinary act of kindness at a time. One crisp autumn afternoon, Margaret handed me a small wooden box tied with a familiar blue ribbon. Inside rested the restored photograph of my father standing beside a younger Nathan, along with the original promise they had signed years earlier. Beneath the document lay a short handwritten note in Nathan's careful script. Every promise has fulfilled its purpose when it becomes a choice instead of an obligation. I carried the box to the lakeside memorial where golden leaves drifted gently across the water. Nathan was already there, quietly replacing fresh white flowers beside the stone before stepping back to admire the peaceful view. He smiled when he saw me, not with relief, but with the quiet confidence of someone who no longer feared losing what mattered most, because it had never belonged to him in the first place. I placed the old agreement back inside the box and closed the lid. "My father believed you would keep your word," I said softly. Nathan lowered his eyes. "I tried." I stepped closer until our shoulders nearly touched. "You did more than that." I reached for his hand, not because anyone expected me to, not because a signature demanded it, but because my heart had already made the decision long before my mind admitted it. His fingers gently wrapped around mine with the same quiet respect that had defined every step of our journey. Across the lake, children laughed as they raced through the community garden planted by volunteers earlier that spring. Their voices floated across the water, carrying a future untouched by the fears that had once shaped ours. Looking back now, I understand that I never truly married the man the world feared. I married the man who quietly carried impossible promises, until someone else was finally strong enough to help carry them with him. And in the end, the greatest gift he ever gave me was not protection. It was the freedom to choose him every single day for the rest of my life.